Glyn,
Thank
welcome.
You. Thank you very much, Joyce. And to try and build on Frank and Kevin's interventions, healthy diet and how are we going to move there? And perhaps to add a couple of themes which have been touched on, but perhaps we could have a little bit more attention to. So here we go. Here's Raj's bad stuff happens and keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So we recognize this in our Living Planet report. And of course, just all those graphs reinforce Tony's comments yesterday that there's a whole system we need to deal with. I'm just going to talk about some strands of that WWF is working with, particularly engaging with business. So my position, WWF-UK's position is business is an agent for change, and we should try and make that a positive change. So not all NGOs have that position, but we are there for working with them. We have to be measured that there is positive progress, other neither we nor they are credible. But I just want to put that in the picture. We haven't heard much about business here, other than Kevin's own business, obviously, just now. So I've been given an incredibly difficult talk. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, how are we going to go from what we eat to conserving biodiversity? And WWF, of course, is a global organization. So what I'm thinking about is largely beyond the UK in terms of the bottom right-hand box, but largely here in the top left-hand box. So there's quite a few steps and jumps with many complications to go through. But I want to run us through diets in terms of sustainable consumption. And sustainable consumption, is all the way through to what we drive, the energy efficiency of our homes and so forth. Sustainable production, because I'm taking a business lens, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the standards we've tried to build with business and MSC, Marine Stewardship Council, Aquaculture Stewardship Council, soy and palm oil are all examples of standards. They are not perfect. They evolved as a way for us to engage with business and to try and set standards that we wish to see in production of some major crops. We had a lot of discussion yesterday about smallholders, and certainly some of these standards are hard for smallholders to achieve because of the extra expense. There are ways of looking at that in terms of cooperatives. So I want to talk a little bit about sustainable production. And then finally, biodiversity conservation, which I think are in two parts. One, protection, and the other, restoration. Because when you look at our Living Planet report, since 1970, of the 4,000 odd species we monitor, we've got a 58% decline from 1970 to now in those populations. So we're going to have to bend the curve to have a planet where nature and people thrive. We launched a report today. I've got to wave it at you all here, just in case you haven't seen it. Nice media pickup. Thank you. I'm sure the conference has helped us there. And there's a little colorful thingy here upstairs. Do grab one. Get the kids to color it in at supper time or whatever. It's just some principles that we pulled together. And I'll give you a little story because I think it's relevant to a lot of the conversations we've had about how we're going to make a change. So the food team looked at the carbon footprint of all foods, provided a short technical report, summarized it in the Grocer magazine, syndicated, ended up with the Daily Mail. And the next day, WWF were all vegetarian loonies. That was the gist of it. Food team pretty wounded, go back and try and think, how are we going to deal with this? And went to our Ministry of Health website for a healthy diet. And Frank has run through the details of that. And putting the two together, it's pretty clear that a healthy diet is also a pretty low carbon diet. And we're focusing on carbon. So the Live Well diet was created, and we've had some great policy support through European funding to look at Live Well diets in UK, Spain, France. And the Daily Mail, 3 months after really slamming us, give us a whole page on what a Live Well diet looks like, Monday to Sunday, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And fundamentally, because I don't think many Daily Mail readers are with us now, but we need to communicate outside this room if we're going to make a difference. Fundamentally, if it was good for the individual and good for the planet, they were happy to run with that. And I think bringing these things together substantially is part of what we need to do if we're going to talk outside this room. So well done to the food team for that. Sorry, I've gone through all the things. So, you know, eat more plants, eat of greater variety, lots of nice colors there, waste less food, moderate your meat consumption, buy food that meets credible standards, eat fewer foods with high fat, sugar, and salt. Not rocket science, simple stuff, and that's what we're trying to push through WWF. And our engagement with business has included with a huge company, Sodexo. They are providing roughly 1 million meals a day in UK and Ireland, especially to institutions, schools, and so forth. In November 2015, they trialed in 8 schools for a month, taking 1 ton of meat out of the various meals and substituting it for about 1 ton of vegetables. That is part of their green and lean diet, and I know Neil is speaking later today, so I don't want to speak on behalf of the company, but I do just want to say that if we can get principles and we can all engage with business to try and get things better, they can be an agent for change. They have a target of 34% reduction in their carbon footprint by 2025 through these meals, and WWF is happy to work alongside that where we have measurable improvement over time. So move to the Cerrado in Brazil, and we've talked a lot about soy, and that's kind of what it looks like. It's fairly grim when it comes to the biodiversity that WWF is trying to support and encourage in terms of a healthy planet with as many different species and healthy populations, human populations, as we can have. Production of soy has increased tenfold in the last 50 years. The EU demand for soy, which is second only to China, is equivalent to 15 million hectares. It's about the size of Greece. A few years ago, UK's demand for soy required an area the size of the whole of Yorkshire. So feed for animals is a big deal and is leading to the destruction of habitats in Brazil and the Amazon. Engagement actually by civil society groups and a campaign that colleagues from Greenpeace first started resulted in companies and producers saying, fine, we will have a moratorium on soy production in the Amazon. And basically, the deforestation that you see there, the orange bars, declines as a result of a moratorium to say no more soy in the Amazon. So that is a major policy achievement, and government and business were involved with that. The consequence is that moving from the Amazon to the adjacent Cerrado, so the deforestation green bars are deforestation in the Amazon, and the orange bars is the Cerrado, the savanna, where soy is now mostly produced. So guess what? You stop producing in the Amazon, and they switch to the Cerrado. So the fundamental point here for us, but anyone who's looking at sustainable production system, is if you do not have a land use spatial plan, you will just get leakage from what may be a good and positive policy and agricultural set of activities to destruction elsewhere. And we're working pretty hard, because that now becomes government's role. Where do you want your agriculture to be? Where do you want your river watersheds to be looked after? Where do you want your national parks? So unless you have that as part of your systems change, our effort at sustainable production will miss its target. There's now a Cerrado manifesto which is trying to address that deforestation, specifically that if you want certified soy, you will not clear any new Cerrado habitat. And that we have been engaging with British businesses last week and hope that they will make commitments to this going forward. So that's the business piece, which, as I say, I think we haven't talked a lot about in the last day and a half. The other piece, I think, is fish, although I see on the fantastic cartoons here, which I must commend, thank you. There's lots of fish in that one. So anyway, I wasn't in that session, I missed it. In the Live Well diet, we suggest that 2 meals of fish a week is sensible and sustainable. I noticed that in some of the acceptable fats, there was a rather nice looking bit of salmon steak there in Frank's presentation. I think if we're going to have a whole approach to food, we're going to have to include fish. They provide micronutrients, and we have similar challenges, both in terms of the wild capture fisheries and also in terms of aquaculture. So, in terms of the wild capture fisheries, North Sea cod here is MSC certified, and I'd just like to acknowledge our partnership with Marks & Spencer, who for a decade in their Plan A have looked at a business being more sustainable. So we're very proud of that partnership. North Sea cod, the numbers basically were approaching collapse, and after a pretty serious cod recovery plan, which involved government, but also through certifications such as MSC, saw the recovery so that actually North Sea cod is in a sustainable fisheries now for our fish and chips, which is mostly when we eat fish. Alaskan salmon is similar, huge supply, probably 5 times more than the North Sea cod I've just referred to. But again, we've tried to work with the fisheries and the government and with John West to say, okay, you need to head for a certified sustainable production system. Aquaculture, maybe half of the fish we eat is being produced in aquaculture. The fundamental challenge are 2 things. One, on the right-hand side, all these lovely mangroves in Mozambique are being cleared to make fish ponds for shrimp production. That's the first thing. Secondly, feed, like soy is used to feed chickens. Some fish are also required to feed the shrimps. So the certification requires that for that certificate to be put on that package of food, no mangrove is cleared in the construction of the fish farm. And secondly, that only sustainable sources of fish, if they are needed, are put in the fish feed. I would love it all to be much stronger, that we have plant-based protein only in aquaculture, but these are some of the steps that WWF is working on, and be very happy to discuss with you in the rest of the commission, the rest of the convention. Thank you very much.